At least 23 people, including an 8-year-old boy, are killed as protests continue across India. The movement is calling for the dismissal of a law that strips Muslims of citizenship. This is an historic day for West Africa. The words of Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara after the signing of an agreement with France to make changes to the CFA franc. The announcement comes during a visit by Emmanuel Macron to the country. Also coming up this hour on France 24, Australia's deadly wildfires. The country's most populous state has been paralysed by what firefighters describe as catastrophic conditions. This amid soaring temperatures. Well, those are our top stories at this hour on France 24. I'm Sanam Shantier. Thank you for watching. We start with India, where at least 9 people have been killed this Saturday alone during clashes between demonstrators and police. Violence has gripped the country since the start of a movement against a new citizenship law, which many have called unconstitutional. The legislation provides a pathway to citizenship for persecuted minorities. That includes Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis and Christians. However, it does ostracize Muslims.
Death, arrests and seething anger. Thousands took to the streets across India to protest the new citizenship law. Saturday's demonstration saw a number of clashes between protesters and authorities.
During this whole process, 4,500 people were taken under preventive custody and later released under a bond.
This new law allows refugees from neighbouring countries to claim Indian citizenship if they have fled religious persecution. The twist, it does not apply to Muslims. Here at New Delhi's Jamia University, hundreds of students and professors also demonstrated against the controversial National Citizenship Register. Aimed at identifying illegal immigrants, the register is currently applied by the local government in the state of Assam, but the central government now also wants to impose it nationwide. Critics say it will be used to target Muslims.
This is unlawful, unconstitutional, undemocratic, and against the interest of the people.
These ongoing protests mark the strongest show of dissent against the Hindu nationalist government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi since his election in 2014.
Next to Ivory Coast, which is currently hosting the French president. On Saturday, on the second day of that trip, an agreement was reached between France and the West African Economic and Monetary Union to abandon the CFA franc. This means that in turn, France will no longer hold 50% of the West African country's reserves in the French treasury. Now, earlier on Friday, keeping in line with tradition, Emmanuel Macron shared a holiday meal with French troops. This as part of a plan to confront the region's rising jihadist violence. Let's now take a listen to the French leader and his Ivorian counterpart who spoke earlier.
President Ouattara and the heads of state of the Economic and Monetary Union of West Africa have made the choice to preserve macroeconomic stability by tying their currency to the euro and guaranteeing French support. Firstly, we are changing the name of the currency from the CFA franc to the echo. Secondly, 50% of our currency will no longer be held in the French treasury. The operational account will also be closed. Thirdly, French representatives will be removed from all decision-making bodies of the Economic and Monetary Union of West Africa. Finally, we also decided to remain pegging our currency to the euro.
To France now, and continuing transport strikes over pension reforms, which have paralysed the country for 2 weeks now. And after inconclusive talks between the government and unions earlier in the week, the movement is set to threaten to disrupt the busy holiday season. Now, here in Paris on Saturday, 8 of the 14 metro lines were closed and many others were running erratically. Emmanuel Macron in the Ivory Coast, meanwhile, has called for a Christmas truce.
Chaos and confusion for travellers in Paris. Unsure if they will make their train or bus, last-minute cancellations and potential refunds that don't resolve travelling problems. Saturday's Grand Départ Day, when most Parisians leave for their Christmas holiday, was difficult for many.
It's a bit stressful because we don't know if the train will be running or not, but except that we live in Norway, so...
Because we have another journey on the 28th, I think we're quite worried. We're doing okay today, but we don't know what's going to happen then, so that's quite stressful coming back.
Most international trains, including the Eurostar and Thalys, are almost fully operational, but there has been a lot of passenger congestion due to cancellations in previous days. At Paris Gare du Nord, passengers said that mostly the situation had improved.
Yeah, it was on time, but it was very crowded, very busy, a lot of pushing. The people weren't the friendliest.
There were a lot fewer trains than usual, but our train is on time today, so we're keeping our fingers crossed.
After 2 weeks of strikes, union leaders are at odds with their workforce. Some are calling for a break over the Christmas holidays, whereas staff on strike refuse point blank to ease pressure on the government.
Now, in other world news, wildfires continue to burn across 3 Australian states, leaving 2 people dead. New South Wales, for its part, is in a 7-day state of emergency, with around 2,000 firefighters battling 100 blazes. Absent from the scene and facing harsh criticism was the country's Prime Minister, who has finally cut short a family trip to Hawaii. Mario Sofos reports.
Wildfires continue to burn across 3 Australian states. New South Wales, the country's most populous state, was left paralysed on Saturday as southerly winds fanned over 100 fires in the region. The town of Bargo was forced to be evacuated in recent days, yet some residents stayed behind to defend their properties.
We saw the smoke and fire basically rushing towards us over the hill, and basically every minute it was probably another kilometre closer before eventually it just hit our fence and we were pretty much there fending the house off. Pretty devastating and catastrophic.
Sydney, that lies east of Bargo, has been left shrouded in toxic smoke from nearby bushfires, posing a risk to residents.
It is a public health emergency because we've never been exposed to so many people. It's pretty much the whole of the New South Wales population being exposed to prolonged smoke. And because we've never experienced this before, we don't know what the eventual outcome of this will be, and probably won't be obvious for another few months or even years.
Bushfires are normal in Australia, but this year they began particularly early and have lasted longer and have been far more intense. Many scientists and environmentalists say climate change is largely to blame. Australia is one of the world's largest carbon emitters per capita due to its booming coal industry. Prime Minister Scott Morrison has been reluctant to link the fires to climate change, sparking protests demanding stronger action.
Now, a company that operates ships laying sections of a new German-Russian pipeline has announced that it's suspending the work. This after Donald Trump signed a law that will impose sanctions on any firm that helps Moscow's state-owned gas company, Gazprom, finish a pipeline into the EU. US lawmakers, meanwhile, have expressed concerns that the project will give Moscow leverage over Europe.
Penalties in the pipeline. US President Donald Trump interfered with Russian and German interests on Friday night by placing sanctions against companies involved in building a natural gas pipeline between the 2 countries. Known as the Nord Stream 2, the $11.8 billion project passes directly beneath the Baltic Sea, avoiding the rest of Europe, including Ukraine. It is set to be operational within a few months. But the latest move by US Congress has created frustration around potential delays.
We're in discussion with American colleagues at all levels. I am under no illusion that it will still be possible to formally prevent these sanctions by law. Ultimately, it will also be a question of how they are now being implemented.
The US had warned that increasing the supply of Russian natural gas to Western Europe would make countries there more dependent on Moscow, also threatening the existing supply line through Ukraine. Last year, Russian gas giant Gazprom supplied Europe with 200.8 billion cubic meters of natural gas, about 40% of that going through Ukraine, earning the country around 3 billion a year in transit fees. But now those same fees are at risk from Nord Stream's completion. Ukraine, while opposing the latest sanctions, has chosen rather to advertise its own potential as a natural gas supplier.
You know, the last country we want under sanctions is Germany. These are our friends, our supporters. We don't want sanctions for Germany. But we have also talked today about how our gas transit system, which is the largest in Europe, can do 3 times what we are now running through the system to Europe and 3 times what can go through Nord Stream 2.
The Trump administration now has 60 days to identify companies and individuals providing services on the pipeline.
Moving on, Donald Trump has launched the U.S. Space Force, the first new U.S. military service in more than 7 decades. The 2020 National Defense Authorization Act increases total military spending by about $20 billion. That's 2.8%. France 24's Camille Nedelak brings us the details of a new branch that marks a huge political victory for the U.S. president, who started championing the idea of a space service in early 2018.
A historic and futuristic day, as US President Donald Trump created the first new military service since 1947, Space Force.
Space. Going to be a lot of things happening in space, because space is the world's newest warfighting domain. Amid grave threats to our national security, American superiority in space is absolutely vital. The Space Force will help us deter aggression and control the ultimate high ground.
This new branch is dedicated to protecting US assets, such as vital communication satellites, which, according to US authorities, could be at risk of sabotage from Russia or China. The aerospatial advances of both nations have left American military commanders worried. Trump has repeatedly called for the creation of Space Force since coming to power, and the announcement is likely to please his supporters. Vice President Mike Pence applauded the move on Twitter. The new service will start small, with an initial budget of $40 million, even though the Pentagon had originally asked for over $72 million. The 16,000 active-duty airmen and civilians in the Air Force's pre-existing space unit will be transferred across to Space Force, which is expected to be fully operational within the next 18 months.
Now, on a more colourful note, tonight is the night of the winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere. Over in Iran, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, it's one of the most celebrated traditional events, also marking the longest and darkest night of the year, known as Yalda. It's a night of poetry, dancing, as you can see here, food, family and friends. Lucky those who are celebrating. Now, staying with that winter season, we have a report on Ice Hotel, which is open for business over in Sweden. It's an icy masterpiece created by builders, sculptors and artists from every corner of the globe. Claire Rush has the cold story.
An artistic marvel some 200 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, the Ice Hotel. For the past 3 decades, this attraction in Sweden's far north has drawn visitors from across the world. For bedding, guests have special sleeping bags under thick reindeer hide blankets, keeping them somewhat warm in this unusual hotel, constructed from snow and ice drawn from a nearby frozen river.
It's a unique thing because we have, like, in a very short, very small area. We have, like, the very source of the ice coming from the river. We're building the hotel right here with art and design from artists from all over the world, and it all goes back to the river. So the life cycle of this project is unique.
The ice that forms the building material is extracted from the river in large blocks in March or April, when the river is frozen at its thickest. The blocks are then stored for construction later on. but the ice suites are only available for a limited time.
It's not eternal. When spring comes around, it melts and becomes water again. When winter returns, it freezes. I really like that cycle.
Guests will have a few more months to enjoy their chilly stay before the hotel melts and once again becomes part of the river from whence it came.
Well, that's it from us.